Setting the vision, scenarios, and design requirements. Setting the vision, scenarios, and design requirements. By carefully analyzing user research and synthesis of personas and other models, we create a clear picture of our users and their respective goals, as well as their situation. This brings us then to the crux of the whole method: how we use this understanding of people to create design solutions that satisfy and inspire users while simultaneously addressing business goals and technical constraints. So, based on our persona, since we have created that in the previous videos, how can we actually synthesize and create a more detailed approach for us to connect that to business goals and technical constraints, as well as clarifying the customer's actual goals, bridging the research design gap without a compass pointing the way through the research, without an organizing principle that highlights features and functions that are relevant to real users and describes how they all fit together into a coherent product that satisfies both user and business needs. No clear solution is in sight. So this is actually how we bridge that from user research to the actual product, design of the product in an iterative process. This chapter describes the first half of a process for bridging this research design gap. It employs persona as the main characters in a set of techniques that rapidly arrive at design solutions in an iterative, repeatable, and testable fashion. This process has four major activities. First, developing stories or scenarios as a means of imagining ideal user interactions, using those scenarios to extract design requirements, using these requirements in turn to define the product's fundamental interaction framework, filling in that framework with ever-increasing amount of design detail. So, first, we will develop a story from the persona we created, and then we will gonna use those stories or scenario to extract a high-level design requirements such as vision, and then the problem, and we're gonna list all of those. We're gonna separate those problems and the solution, so that the solution does not. The solution could be ever more sophisticated. Like, it doesn't depend on any technology because there's always one or more solution to a problem. And then using those requirements in turn to define product's fundamental interaction framework. So that will be the basis of the details of our interaction framework with the product. And then filling that framework with visual design, interaction details, or interaction design, industrial design, and then usability test. So we have discussed that in the previous videos. The glue that hold this process together, the compass in the wilderness of research data and potential product features, is narrative. Using personas to create stories that point to user satisfaction. So the key that glued that user research to a synthesis and repeatable process is actually narrative, because it allows us to explain it clearly, while at the same time helping us to list the requirements needed for that task, because story has the power of understanding the real situation compared to like list and forms. And also, it is a powerful communication tool for other stakeholders that may not be as technical savvy as us. So, scenarios, narrative as a design tool. From a very young age, we are accustomed to using stories to think about possibilities, and this is an incredibly effective way to imagine a new and better future for our users. Imagining a story about a person using our product leverages our creativity to a greater power than when we just imagine a better form factor or configuration of screen elements. So because we're trying to structure it through story and we remember stories better than just list or structure, we leverage our creativity. Therefore, we get more information because we need to create a plot, etc. Furthermore, because of the intrinsically social aspect of narrative, it is a very effective and compelling way to share good ideas among team members and stakeholders. And experiences designed around narrative tend to be more comprehensive and engaging for users because they are structured around the story. Interaction design is first and foremost design of behavior that occurs over time. Therefore, a narrative structure combined with the support of fast and flexible visualization tools such as a humble whiteboard is perfectly suited for motivating, envisioning, representing, and validating interaction concepts. So, interaction design is actually complex because it occurs over a period of time with different devices across different people. Therefore, a simple tool will help simplify that complexity, such as a humble whiteboard that could easily be undone instead of a inflexible code. Interaction design narratives are quite similar to the comic book-like sequences called storyboards that are used in the motion picture industry. They share two significant characteristics: plot and brevity. Just as storyboards breathe life into a movie script, design solutions should be created and rendered to follow a plot, a story. So just as a storyboard provide life to a movie script, because of this board, design solutions should be created and rendered to follow a plot as well, a story. So your solution must come from a story. Putting too much detail into the storyboards simply wastes time and money and has a tendency to tie us to suboptimal ideas simply because drawing them consumes significant resources, leaving less time for concept and behavior level refinement. So, putting a lot of time on drawing consumes significant resources. So you know you need to stop in the drawing board if the ideas becomes repeated, right? And then it will avoid you to have more time for concept and behavior level refinement of the actual product. So you may think that you define all these things in the storyboard or drawing them. No, there's actually refinement part or iterative part, just like in Agile that we've discussed in the previous video. Because they are enough to convey the action and the potential experience, many millions of Hollywood dollars have been invested on the basis of simple pencil sketches or line drawings. So those drawings are enough to convey an action and potential experience. The key or the important thing that there is actually the user research, the idea itself, not the form or the actual physical uh, sketches or line drawing. So by focusing on the narrative, we can quickly and flexibly arrive at a high level design solution without getting bogged down by the inertia and expense inherent in high production value rendering, such as what menus are we going to use, what framework. We have discussed that in the previous videos already, the specifics of how we actually design the form from industrial design point of view, from visual design, how we actually organize the information, and how we and how we design the interaction using the key paths that we have discussed in the previous video. So this is kind of like the basis for that. However, such renderings are certainly appropriate once a working design framework is in place. So we only want to render that specific, such as changing a model or adding a text box, like we discussed in the previous video or last video, in which the synthesizer generator provide a new option to show a text using a full screen in a mobile app. So scenarios versus use case and user stories. Goal-directed scenarios are an iterative means of defining a product's behavior from the standpoint of specific users, personas. So a goal-directed scenario is actually an iterative process from the standpoint of the persona, which came from goal-directed research. This includes not only the system's functionality, but the priority of functions and how those functions are expressed in terms of what the user sees and how she interacts with the system. So for developing personas, scenarios to create the requirements, we actually get that from persona. But while getting that, it includes not only the system's functionality or the system-wide functionality, but the order of those functions and how those functions are expressed in terms of what the user sees and how she interacts with the system. So how those functions in the back end are provided as a representation model that is close to the user mental model. Use cases, on the other hand, are a technique based on exhaustive descriptions of the system's functional requirements, often a transactional nature, focusing on low-level user action and accompanying system response. The system's precise behavior, exactly how the system responds, typically is not part of a conventional or concrete use case. It permits a complete cataloging of user tasks for different classes of users, but say little or nothing about how these tasks are presented to the user or how they should be prioritized in the interface. So it's kind of like a list of functions or functional requirements focused on low-level user action and accompanying system response. Kind of like the worldwide functions of the systems. It is usually used for testing, for usability testings, to make sure that there's no one behavior or functions that would make the system malfunction. So this system's precise behavior, exactly how the system responds, typically is not part of a conventional or concrete use case. So the system precise response to those input, to those functions, is not included in a conventional or concrete use case. It permits a complete cataloging of user tasks for different classes of users. So it provides tasks that accommodates different classes of user, whether it beginner, intermediate, or expert, but say little or nothing about how these tasks are presented to the user. So it provides those functions, but it doesn't provide an implementation details which confuse the user or how they should be prioritized in the interface, and it doesn't organize the functions in the interface, just like a goal-directed scenarios. They treat all user interaction as equally likely and important, which may be important in software engineering to find edge cases, but not in design. User stories are short sentence phrase like this: as a user, I would like to log into my online banking account. Though it could be more than that, but it doesn't really represent the a story. Kind of like a statement of a user that wants to achieve something, and then you want to usually solve that in agile process. So we have discussed that in the previous video as well. Typically, this is followed by another couple of sentences briefly describing the necessary interface to accomplish the interaction. So we have this problem, and then you're gonna provide this interface for solution. User stories are much more like informally praise requirements than they are like scenarios. They don't describe the user's entire flow at big picture level or describe what the user's end goal is. It only describes the task level on what is the actual task that is hindering this user. It doesn't say about big level detail about the goals that we have discussed in the previous videos. Scenarios are more akin to epics in terms of scope. So in Agile, there's an epics, so that's more like the story, not the statement or problem and solution statement, and level of granularity, and they do not describe task level interactions. So it's not specific interaction. So this is actually the scenarios that we will get our requirements are. So again, we in here we describe requirements not as a features or functions, because those are more task level details. We describe that more like a high level detail such as goals, so that we could be creative on defining the solution, because there could be more than one solution to one problem. That's also the reason we will separate the problems and solution, but rather broader and more far-reaching clusters of interactions that are intended to meet user goals. So remember, user is far more complex than we actually initially thought of, because they, especially for these interactive products, which encompasses different transactions at the different life cycles of a different customers at a different time. Epics focus more on functions and presentation of user interfaces and interactions than they do on user behaviors. So ethics, it focuses more on the function and presentation of user interfaces and interaction than they do they do than they do on user behaviors. So you can think of that as they focus more on representation that closely resemble users' mental model, so that we can align our implementation based on that, or representation model based on that mental model. We're not focusing on implementation or function level task. We're focusing on how the user actually see his problem and the solution that could be on his problem. Scenario-based design. In 1990, scenario are commonly used to describe a method of design problem solving by concretization, using a specific story to both construct and illustrate design solutions. So, since 1990, scenario are being used to describe a method of design problem solving. So, it's a way or technique for design problem solving using a story to both construct and illustrate the design solutions. Then after that, Carol introduced a new definition, though she certainly understands the power and importance of scenarios in the design process. We've found two shortcomings with scenarios as he approaches them. Carol's concept of the actor as an abstracted, role-oriented model is insufficiently concrete to provide understanding of or empathy with users. It is impossible to design appropriate behaviors for a system without understanding its users in detail. So it defines the scenario as a role oriented. So an actor on the scenario as a role oriented instead of more encompassing behavioral characteristics persona that encompass different behaviors for different users. Uh, Carol's scenarios jump too quickly to the elaboration of tasks without considering the user's goals and motivations that drive and filter this task. Although Carol does briefly discuss goals, he refers only to goals of the scenario. These goals are circularly defined as the completion of specific tasks. So the goals are in the task itself. So it is related to the task, not separated, because as we have learned, goals are independent of the task. There's different way, or you can think of a task like a solution to the problem, which is the goal. There's different solution or task to a given goal. In our experience, user goals must be considered before user tasks can be identified and prioritized. Without addressing the motivation of human behavior, high-level product definition can be difficult and misguided. But persona allow us to broaden our horizon, which allow us to explore user motivation and goals and how it should influence and prioritize tasks in the future. So we can better provide functions that is better than the current system. Or if the current system is better, maybe there is some problem that could help the user better achieve their goals. Because remember, uh, user will do or achieve their goal without us if they can. So they help answer the questions: what should this product do, and how should this product look and behave? So it more encompass the overall problem rather than just one. Based scenarios, persona are focused uh, on people and how they think and behave rather than on technology or business goals. So it focused on people, not so much in technology. Technology is just a means to achieve that people goals. Scenarios can capture the nonverbal dialogue between the user and a product, environment, or system over time, as well as the structure and behavior of interactive functions. So its goal serve as a filter for tasks and as a guide for structuring the display of information and controls during the iterative process of constructing the scenarios. Goals serve as a filter for tasks and as a guide for structuring the display of information and controls during the iterative process of constructing the scenarios. So this is actually where the visual design will structure the information based to better achieve the goals with less cognitive effort. Later, we will discuss how pretending it's magic is just helping the user achieve his goals immediately, because usually the persona could not define the goal itself. There's many options to solve a problem, just like in the previous book. The key theme that is appearing or recurring is that a lot of people is not aware on the solutions available. So and also their mental model of that implementation of that technical problem is just enough for them to achieve that goal. That's why, and also they have been habitually used to that, for example, task or technology to achieve their goal. That makes them choose that task. But there could be a better or faster task to achieve that. So it's just being aware on the choices to achieve that. So if we could provide that better or faster functions for users, we could attain more customers, and at the same time provide less stress to our current users. So the more we understand them and their goals, and provide them that, and make them more productive, the more business revenue we get. So again, that's how we bridge the business and user goals. Scenario, content, and context are derived from information gathered during the research phase and analyzed during the modeling phase. So this persona-based scenario, content, and context are derived from the research and the modeling phase in the previous video. Designers perform a type of role play in creating these scenarios, walking the persona through their future interactions with the product or service. So in creating these scenarios, in the drawing board, a simple scenario that gives the environment the goal. So later we will explain this in detail. It's a text-based form. It let them empathize with the user or the persona. They walk to the persona through their future interactions with the product or service, almost similar to actors performing improvisation. So we're trying to really understand what's going on in the customer's mind in a high-level view, being focused, remaining focused on the user's goal and task. This process leads to a real-time synthesis of structure and behavior, typically at a whiteboard or on tablets, and later informs the detailed look and feel. So this will be our basis, this text-based thinking of our user scenario. So 3 types of scenarios. There are 3 different scenarios at different time in design process, each with increasingly more detail or interface focus. So how do we actually create this? We will divide that in 3 different scenarios, starting from simple to increasing complex and more details. The first thing we need to do before we sketch anything is the context scenario. Later we will gonna dig into the detail, and we will provide examples on the context scenario, which were written from persona's point of view. So this is actually how we improvise that. focus on their activities and behavior patterns, mental models, and goals. At a high level, it is how the product can best serve the needs of persona and where the designer has the most leverage to imagine an ideal experience. So this is the where the designer can be creative. It starts from user research and the persona goal, and then the designer will now create a context in which that persona um, behavior patterns, mental models, and goals kind of submerge at once. So that's where the designer's thinking or intuition will comes up. So in the previous video, we discussed how this intuition or synthesis about the designer's ability to synthesize problem and then solve it. This is actually one of the key points or key inflection for that. Once functional and data elements has been defined, as in the previous video we discussed this, the functions on the wireframe of the videos and the data that accommodates that is just really a means to achieve user goal. So once we define that, and later we will further discuss how to get it, the context will become a key path scenarios. So once we have the functions and data that the customer could manipulate, because remember this GUI is just manipulating controls, we will now create the most common. We will prioritize those controls that aligns with user mental model of their most used functions by more specifically describing user interaction and point of view of the product. This is also where we can introduce new vocabulary because we will focus on the most important user interaction and functions that our system provide, and we the persona and while having the persona's goal in mind. So these, as in context scenario, are iteratively refined in detail as more and more details is developed. So first we will start with context scenario, then we will create this key path scenarios once we get the functional and data from that context scenario. And throughout this process, the design team uses validation scenario to test the design solution in a variety of situations. So this is where the developer type thinking will come. The what's that? Where is that developer? I think it's here. Here, use cases. So it's kind of like here the use cases and the validation scenarios is kind of like similar because it both are testing all the edge cases. So as you saw, we started with the goal or the context overall goal so that we could better provide or see what options or tasks most fit with that goal, because if we decide immediately, as you can see, we focus on task, we miss the available task that could better solve, that could be faster. So that's the reason why important. And also if we focus on this like list of requirements or use case and this validation scenarios, we focus on task again because we're trying to test it without actually really understanding what is the customer function needed for that goal. So these scenarios tend to be less detailed and typically take the form of a number of what if questions about the proposed solutions. So it's not as detailed as here. You may think that this validation is more detailed, but it's not, and we discussed that in the previous video. Previous videos covers development and use of key path and validation scenarios. So this key path, we've discussed that, and the validation. Now we will discuss how to create this context scenario. So before that, we need to define the requirements. So this is how we will separate the problem and solution. Design requirements, the what of interaction. In other creative fields, the importance of defining the what first is well understood. Graphic novelists don't start with inking and coloring. They explore their characters and then outline and storyboard. So describe the role or the actor and outline that in storyboard in cards. It could be cards or roughly sketching both the narrative and form, or providing the actual form or prototype. That is exactly what we will do as we define our digital concepts. It's it is critical to define and agree on the what before we move on to the next question. How the product looks, behaves, operates, and feel. This in turn can lead to so if we don't do this, the what, and we focus on the why, it will turn will lead to I like versus you like, subjective difference within the product team and stakeholders, with no easy way to converge consensus. So design principle, define what the product will do before you design how the product will do it, so that the stakeholders, you have a way to communicate with the stakeholders to avoid this confusion and misunderstanding in this collaboration. Because remember, the goal of the designer is to connect the user research to the actual goal. So part of that job is having or collaborating with different stakeholders. Now here we just not copy, we just have this proven method from other industry as well, such as graphic novelists. They start their problem they start the design using the what or the available options. So instead of digging into the details, kind of like getting into the big picture first. So design requirements aren't features. In many product development organizations, requirement has become synonymous with feature or function. So how do we actually define these design requirements? First is that we need to define what it is not. It is not actually a feature or function. That's a task level way to see it. There is clearly a relationship between requirements and functions, which we leverage as a key part of our design process. So this is still important after we define the goals or these requirements. The feature or function is important after we have defined the requirements. But we suggest that you think of design requirements as being synonymous with needs, the overall, the big picture. Put another way, at this point, you want to rigorously define the human and business needs your product must satisfy. So, because we're not just solving the user problem, we also need to solve bigger problems not related to just that user problem. We're actually orchestrating a much more bigger and integrated problem. So it's not as easy as people might think of just using another technical tool or etc. Another facts is that design requirements aren't specifications. Marketing requirements documents or product requirements documents, MRD or PRD, are often only loosely connected to any kind of user research and quite frequently are generated without any serious exploration of user needs. Although, so people used to use this uh, MRD and PRD. It's a list of product requirements and marketing requirements to satisfy these requirements. But this is not actually what requirement means, because this actually based on serious it doesn't base on any user research or persona or modeling that we described in the previous video. Although the what described in these documents might, if you're lucky, reflect a coherent product, so these are usually not coherent because it doesn't really came from solid foundation. There's little guarantee that it will be a product the users find desirable. So the user will not like it because it doesn't really came from them. It's not what they want. Another thing about this is you don't want to speculate on what user wants, especially in this complicated software or interactive products. Another issue is they jump into the how without understanding the what. For example, think about designing a data analytics tool to help an so another thing with this specification is that they jump into the how or the specs. If it's hardware, you think of specs, right? Without understanding the what. For example, think about designing a data analytics tool to help an executive better understand the state of his business. If you jump right to the how without understanding the what, you might assume that the tool's output should be reports. It would be easy to come to this conclusion. If you perform user research, you probably would have noticed that reports are a widespread and accepted solution. So if you perform this research, user research, the common user research, you would see that it's a widespread solution. But just because it is a widespread doesn't mean you will conform that. Again, the reason why you're trying to redesign is to innovate that will meet better that will not confirm your users to how things actually work. I mean, how things the way they are, but you're trying to innovate and push new things that will better serve them. However, if you imagine some scenarios and analyze your users' actual requirements, you might realize that your executive actually need. So if you imagine a scenario and create a persona and analyze the user actual requirements, the real meaning of requirements, you might realize that your executive actually needs a way to recognize exceptional situations before opportunities are missed or problems arise. He or she also needs a way to understand emerging trends in the data. From there, it isn't difficult to see that static, flat reports are hardly the best way to meet these needs. With such a solution, your executive has to do the hard work of scrutinizing several of these reports, it could be hundreds of documents, to find the significant data underlying such exceptions and trends. Much better solutions might include data-driven exception reporting or real-time trend monitors. So data-driven exception like a critical incident of the data or real-time trend monitors that allows them to find the trend without the executive navigating it. So third issue with this is without a way for stakeholders to visualize the contents of this list, to see a design that reflects what the list describes, neither stakeholders nor developers will have an easy time making decisions based on what is described. So if the stakeholders can visualize the contents of these requirements, to see that a design that reflect what the risk describe, neither stakeholders nor developers will have an easy time making decisions based on what is described. So they will not be able to visualize a solution because it doesn't connect to what the user actual goals. So they can't see the solutions as well because you focused on the actual task. So you need to provide these executives and developers or stakeholders and the stakeholders a high level view so that they could generate solutions or imagine solutions themselves. But as we will later provide, we will do that in iterative process, and we will provide them an initial requirements. So design requirements are strategic. Separating problem and solution is an approach that provides maximum flexibility in the face of changing technological constraints and rising opportunities. So what you want to do is, again, you want to separate this so that it provides this anti-fragility in the face of challenging or changing technical technical evolution. By clearly defining the user needs, and designers can work with technologies to find the best viable and feasible solutions without compromising the paradox ability to help people achieve their goals. So again, it is helping us generate a solution because that allows us to focus on the goals rather than the task. So as you can see, the task became a distraction if you prioritize that at the first step of design. Working in this manner, the product definition is not at risk when the implementation runs into problems. So when your developer runs into problems, they can still rely on these unchanging requirements of the customer. So they can better provide another solution because let's say that task or that specific framework or libraries you provided is not supported anymore. So therefore your developer are stuck. Also, it becomes possible to plan long-term technology development so that it can provide increasingly sophisticated ways of meeting user needs. So with added technology, you may provide a better ways. Maybe there is an innovation for this technology or function that could redesign these functions that will better support the needs. Another thing about our characteristics or properties of requirements is that it comes from multiple sources. It just not came from designer alone. We've already talked about personas and scenarios as a primary source of design requirements. While that may be the most important part of the requirements equation, other requirements also factor into the design business needs and constraints, as well as technical and legal constraints, typically are gathered during interviews with the product's business and stakeholders. So the next sections offer a more elaborate list of requirements. So another thing is this came actually from our previous videos from the persona and goal-directed research. The requirements definition process. So the requirements definition shown in 4.1 answers the broad questions about what product is and what it should do. The framework definitions answer the translation of robust models into design solutions consisting of two major phases. So this framework, where we translate that to wireframework, to a visual hierarchy, and to interaction into that function data, and then we test that. We've discussed that in the previous video. Now we will discuss the broad questions about what a product is and what it should do. So the requirements definition showed in 14.1, create problem and vision statements, explore and brainstorm. So you will explore and brainstorm. This problem and vision statement, of course, will come from our user research and persona research or model. Explore and brainstorm, that will come up as will I mean we've discussed that in the previous video on how a generator could provide or explore, brainstorm while synthesizer help them identify persona expectations, construct context scenarios. So this is actually the three types of scenarios that we will use here. Here, scenario, content, and context are derived from information. So persona-based scenario. So these scenarios are actually the one that we will use to create this context scenario, to create this list of requirements. So after this, the concepts we've learned in the previous video on how to actually use this list as a basis for our further, research and design or the technical requirements is just a reiteration. So we make it easy to implement or to innovate on the detailed level if we know this. The framework definition answer questions about how a product behaves and how it's structured to meet user goals. So the framework definition is more like on the how, it's not on the what. Designers can expect to cycle through steps 3 through 5 several times until the requirements are stable. This is a necessary part of the process and shouldn't be short-circuited. So it's an iterative process actually to create these requirements because we're getting more and more detail. But since we have created a solid foundation for persona, we are at a better foot. So the requirements definition process consists of the following 5 steps, which are described in detail in the remainder of this chapter. Create problem and vision statements. So what are we actually trying to solve? So these are important because we need to connect this user and business goals that we can simultaneously communicate to developers and stakeholders. Create problem and explore or brainstorm. Identify persona expectations. Construct context scenarios. So we will construct from those 3 types of scenarios. Identify design requirements. Step 1. Before create problem and vision statements. Before beginning the process of ideation, at this point, we already have a sense of which users we're targeting and what their goals are. But lacking a clear product mandate, there is still considerable room for confusion. Problem and vision statements provide just such a mandate and are extremely helpful in building consensus among stakeholders before the design process moves forward. At a high level, the problem statement defines the purpose of the design initiative. A design problem statement should concisely reflect a situation that needs changing for both the personas and the business providing the product to the personas. So it's about bridging the gap or kind of like noticing the change or there's a transformation that should happen based on the persona that we've got and our business goals, while also balancing those two desires. Often a cause and effect relationship exists between business concerns and persona concerns. For example, company X customer satisfaction ratings are low. Market share has diminished by 10% over the past year because users have inadequate tools to perform task X, Y, and Z that would help them meet their goal of G. So as you can see, it's about meeting their goal of G, because once they meet their goal of G using this task X, Y, and Z, they will be more productive, they will earn more, and therefore we will earn more. Connecting business issues to usability issues is critical to drive stakeholders buy-in to design efforts and to frame the design effort in terms of both user and business goals. So these are the key in connecting the user research to an actual concrete design change or transformation that will actually increase our revenue. So as you can see, the empathy of design in research helps enormously here, and connecting that company goals to user usability is critical to drive the or to persuade the decision maker. The vision statement is an inversion of the problem statement that serves as a high level design objective or mandate. In the vision statement, so it's like kind of like the solution you're trying to, it's like an inversion of the problem. It's not solution, but it's just an inversion. In the vision statement, you led with the user's needs, and you transition from those to how the design vision meets business goals. So the new design project of X that you are proposing will help users achieve G by allowing them to do X, Y, and Z with greater accuracy, efficiency, and so on, and without problems A, B, and C that they currently experience. This will dramatically improve companies' X customer satisfaction ratings and lead to increased market share. The content of both the problem and vision statements should come directly from research and user methods, because again, you don't want to speculate on these complex interactive products. User goals and needs should be derived from the primary and secondary personas. So these goals should came from primary and secondary. So the G should came from primary and secondary persona, and business goals should be extracted from stakeholders' interviews. So this problem should be from stakeholders. So you're gonna get this company's dissatisfaction from stakeholder. What's the problem? Like customer satisfaction rating is low, etc. We essentially break down user goals and frustrations into problem and vision statement that connects user goals to our business needs. So in these statements, it will serve as a communication tool that help us bridge these user goals to our business needs. Now, step 2, explore and brainstorm. At this point in the project, we have been researching and modeling users and domain for days or even months, and it is almost impossible to avoid having developed some preconceptions about what the solution looks like. So it's like one of the principles of problem solving. If you really understand the problem, you solve like 90% of it. So it's almost impossible to avoid having developed some preconceptions about what the solution looks like, because you've clearly seen the problem. It should be obvious to you now. The primary purpose here is to eliminate as much preconception as possible. Doing so allows designers to be open-minded and flexible as they use their imagination to construct scenarios and to use their analytical skill to derive requirements from these scenarios. So based on that persona and scenarios and the list of requirements, what you need to do now based on that solutions that generated from your mind is to prioritize, and then make sure that you are basing the solution from those requirements and from those user research. A side benefit of brainstorming at this point is in the process is that it switches your brain into solution mode. Much of the work performed in the research and modeling phases is analytical in nature, and it takes a different mindset to come up with inventive designs. We also discussed how generator and synthesizer both can work on this in the previous video. It's also useful to cherry pick some exploratory concepts to share with stakeholder or clients as a means to discover their true appetite for creative solutions and time horizons. So it's also useful to now share those you think solutions to the stakeholder, because it will allow you to meet their needs. So that's the business goal. So based on the solutions you're proposing, since you need to meet the user and business goals, you need to see if they actually want or they will actually buy into that. If the stakeholders say they want blue sky thinking, you can use carefully selected exploratory concepts to test your blue sky ideas and watch their reactions. If discussions seem negative, you know to calibrate your thinking a bit more conservatively as you move forward with your scenarios. Uh, since the discussion became negative, you know now what they want and what they do not want. So don't spend too much time on the brainstorming step. A few hours for simple projects to a couple of days for a project of significant scope or complexity should be more than sufficient for you and your teammates to get all those crazy ideas out of your systems. If you find your ideas getting repetitious or the popcorn stops popping, that's a good time to stop. Step 3, identify persona expectations. Mental models are deeply ingrained, are almost subliminal in terms of personas' self-awareness of them, and are frequently the result of a lifetime of cumulative experience. People's expectation about a product and how it works are highly informed by their mental model. So again, we're trying to create a high-level view of scenario here. Uh, or requirements that we can use as a justification to an ever more increasing details that would provide us the solution to our customers. Now, what are we actually trying to do here? So scenarios narrative as the design tool. Actually, we're bridging the gap from research to design. So we're trying to be clear about the requirements, because later using these requirements, so we created the scenarios, right? Using these scenarios, we created a list of problem and vision statements. Now here we're actually trying now to get a more detailed explanation for mental models that are deeply ingrained with our persona. To accomplish this, we formally record these expectations. So they are an important source of design requirements. So from user research, some of these have been done already, but now we will explicitly write it for clarity and add some additional information. To accomplish this, we formally record this. They are an important source of design requirements for each primary and secondary persona. So again, it stems from primary and secondary, this persona expectations and the brainstorm, as well as the problem vision statement. So you saw how it is connected to these two people, the primary and secondary. Attitudes, experiences, aspirations, and other social, cultural, environmental, and cognitive factors that influence the persona's expectations. So these are the ingrained habits. Remember, the key thing here is the ingrained habits of primary and secondary, and then their environment, kind of like a holistic view from their perspective. General expectations and desires the persona may have about the experience of using the product. Behaviors the persona will expect or want from the product. So what is the functions? We're getting more detail here, not just on the goal. We already know the goal of the primary and secondary, right, from the previous video, and we explore some solutions already. We already have a problem and solutions, vision statement, and a problem statement. Now we're getting more details. What's the behavior the persona will expect or want from the product? How that persona thinks about basic elements or units of data. For example, in an email application, the basic elements of data might be messages and people. Your persona descriptions may contain enough information to answer these questions directly. So the persona could be used to answer those questions. So these are actually a proper format for us: attitudes, general expectation, behavior, how the persona thinks about basic elements, kind of like a more detailed view of the interface now. So these are actually standard questions that you need to answer, but it can be collected from persona details. However, your research data will remain a rich resource. Use it to analyze how interview subjects define and describe objects and actions that are part of their usage patterns. Along with the language and grammar they use. So here are some things to look for. What do the interview subject mention first? Which action words, verbs do they use? What nouns? So those verbs and nouns will help you define what will be the name of the controls on the interface. Which intermediate steps, tasks, or objects in a process don't they mention? Hint, this might not be terribly important to how they think about things. So which intermediate step, task, or objects in a process don't they mention? Or things they don't mention. So now we will now create a contextual scenarios that will reiterate the three types of scenarios we have discussed that start from high level to increasingly level of details to allow us to provide a high level concept that will be the basis of the more detailed design of our interface. A context scenario tells the story of a particular user persona with various motivations, needs, and goals. Using the future version of your product in the way that is most typical for that persona. So this is a most common scenario for that primary persona, aka intermediate users. It describes the broad context in which that persona's usage pattern are exhibited. It includes environmental and organizational, in the case of enterprise system, considerations. It also includes environmental and organizational, in the case of enterprise systems considerations. A successful context scenario captures all of these attributes and addresses them in the extrapolated workflow narrative you create. So a successful context scenario capture all of these attributes that provides a more holistic view of the persona and address them in a extrapolated workflow narrative you create. Now we will provide example for that later. Context scenarios establish the primary touch points that each primary and secondary persona that is also the basis of the key path scenarios we discussed in the previous videos has with the system and possibly with other personas over the course of a day or some other meaningful length of time. Don't yet worry about exactly how things will get accomplished. Initially, you should treat the design as a bit of a magic black box. Context scenarios should be broad and relatively shallow in scope. They should not describe product or interactions detail, but rather should focus on high-level actions from the user's perspective. So it should be broad because we're not focusing on the detail yet, and it will be the focus of the more increasing detail of redesigning the interface based on this. So it should be broad and relatively shallow in scope. They should not. So this is actually how we define those goals, those uh, problems that do not change, who are persona, what's their typical day look like. And again, narrative is the best way to explain that, which is this scenario with persona. So this way, we become more creative instead of just list of requirements or problems that does not mean anything from the developer or stakeholders point of view. We will provide example of this. They should not describe product or interaction detail, but rather should focus on high-level actions from the user perspective. It is important to map out the big picture first so that we can systematically identify design requirements. So again, one of the key initiatives with this design process and problem solving is that we need to start with the big picture first. We need to zoom out to see what's the available options. Only then we can design appropriate interactions and interfaces, and it can address questions such as in what settings will the product be used? Will it be used for extended amounts of time? Is the persona interrupted? Do several people use a single workstation or device? With what other products will it be used? What primary activities does the persona need to perform to meet her goals? What is the expected end result of using the product? How much complexity is permissible based on persona skill and frequency of use? In most cases, more than one context scenario is necessary. This is true especially when there are multiple primary personas, but sometimes even a single primary persona may have two or more distinct contexts of use. So most cases, there's more than one of this for each persona, because again, we're trying to look at the personas per point of view, as we are increasingly or we have discovered in the previous previous video, persona is more actually complicated than what might people think, especially when they're they are alone is complicated, which makes them interacting with a complex in a software more complicated. So this is true especially when there are multiple primary persona, but sometimes even a single primary persona may have two or more distinct contexts of use, and these are entirely textual. We're not yet describing from like we have discussed in the previous video, which is the wireframe, etc. This will be the basis for that. This discussion with your team should be accomplished as a textual narrative, saving the how for later refinement steps. So more than one context scenario for a project is necessary. Even a single primary could have two or more distinct contexts. Even a secondary. So a sample context scenario, the following is the first iteration of context scenario for a primary persona for a digital assistant PDA type phone, including both the device and its service. Our persona is Vivian Strong, a real estate agent in Indianapolis whose goals are to balance work and home life, close the deal, and make each client feel like he or she is the only client. Here's Vivian context scenario. First, while getting ready in the morning, Vivian uses her phone to check her email because it has the relatively large screen and quick connection time. So instead of desktop, she used the phone. It's more convenient than booting up a computer, as she rushes to make her daughter Alice a sandwich for school. Vivian sees an email from her newest client, Frank, who wants to look at the house this afternoon. The device has his contact info, so she can call him with a simple action right from the email. While on the phone with Frank, Vivian switches to speakerphone so she can view the screen while talking. She looks at her appointments to see when she's free. When she creates, she moves to the home button, make the speaker first, and moves to the home and check the calendar. When she creates a new appointment, the phone automatically makes it an appointment with Frank because it knows with whom she is talking. So it's immediate. She quickly enters the address of the property into the appointment as she finishes her conversation. So as you can see, it's an immediate. This is a current app that she's been using. Now what we're trying to do is imagine ways to make this better, the solve the customer problem better. So this is the current app, uh, or our current problem, or the current way our app is actually solving that. So after sending Alice to school, Vivian heads into the real estate office to gather some papers for another appointment. Her phone has already updated her Outlook appointments, so the rest of the office knows where she'll be in the afternoon. The day goes by quickly, and eventually Vivian is running a bit late. As she heads towards the property she'll be showing Frank, the phone alerts her that her appointment is in 15 minutes. When she flips open the phone, she sees not only the appointment but also a list of all documents related to Frank, including emails, memos, phone messages, and call logs to Frank's number. Vivian initiates a call, and the phone automatically connects to Frank because it knows her appointment with him is soon. She lets him know that she'll be there in 20 minutes. Vivian knows the address of the property but is unsure exactly where it is. She pulls over and taps the address, and she puts into the appointment. The phone downloads directions along with a thumbnail map showing her location relative to the destination. Vivian gets to the property on time and starts showing it to Frank. She hears the phone ring from her purse. Normally, while she is in an appointment, the phone automatically goes to voicemail. But Alice has a code she can press to get through. The phone knows it's Alice calling, so it uses a distinctive ringtone. Vivian takes the call. Alice missed the bus and needs to be picked up. Vivian calls her husband to see if he can do it. She gets his voicemail. He must be out of service range. She tells him she's with a client and asks if he can get Alice. 5 minutes later, the phone sounds a brief tone. Vivian recognizes it as her husband. She sees he sends her an instant message. I'll get Alice. Good luck on the deal. So notice we just focus on the goals of the customer and her problems and the tasks that help her achieve the goal currently. Now this will be our basis or the foundations or great foundations that we have came from persona and user research that we're now gonna use to provide a more sophisticated and a better solution based on this actual need. So there's a problem here. As you can see, Vivian missed the bus, and there could be some improvement that could be applied there so that we can increase this customer satisfaction with our company so that we can achieve them better with their deals. If they can get more deals with their real estate, so that will be our marketing, the sales that we're gonna be using to sell this product to them, and to later subsequently charge more if they will actually pay for that additional feature that will help them solve this in one click. So those are the basics. These are the um, problem that will help us better communicate to our stakeholder. Notice how the scenario remains at a fairly high level without getting too specific about interfaces or technologies. It's important to create scenarios that are within the realm of technical possibility, but at this stage, the details of reality are unimportant. Kinda like in thesis, The details of the implementation of, for example, a video calling app is not important. The important is the goal and what you are trying to solve with your actual product. What are the tasks that could be used, because you could use different technologies nowadays to create your back end, front end, those AI summarization tools, etc. We want to leave the door open for truly novel solutions, and it's always possible to scale back. We're ultimately trying to describe an optimal yet still feasible experience. Pretending it's magic, a powerful tool in the early stage of developing scenarios is to pretend the interface is magic. If your persona has goals and the product has magic powers to meet them, how simple could the interaction be? Magic solutions obviously won't suffice, but figuring out creative ways to technically accomplish interactions that are as close to magic solutions as possible from the persona's perspective. So remember, it's about their perspective on how they see that as a magic. If it removes their cognitive load, removing exercise, etc., is the essence of great interaction design. So that is actually the essence of that interaction design, removing as much necessary less, making it less, as less as possible, as simplistic. Again, perfection is not adding more, but removing and then trying to see where we can't remove anymore. That's the definition of perfection. Products that meet goals with the minimum of hassle and intrusion seem almost magical to users. Some of the interactions in the preceding scenario may seem a bit magical, but all are possible with technology available today. It's the goal-directed behavior, not the technology alone, that provides the magic. Design principle: in early stages of design, pretend the interface is magic. Step 5. Identify design requirements. After you are satisfied with an initial draft of your context scenario, you can analyze it to extract the persona's needs or design requirements. So as you have that initial, so again you will reiterate that as you get more feedback using this the agile we have discussed in the previous video. These design requirements can be thought of as consisting of objects, actions, and context. Now, our definition of requirements is not actually the features or functions of the MRD or PRD that these other departments define. We discussed that as objects, actions, and context. Thus, a requirement from the preceding scenario might read as follows: call, which is the action; a person, which is the object, directly from an appointment context. So that's actually, we've got that. We need to provide an interface feature that will allow the call from a person or object, call a person or object, or manipulate that object directly from an appointment context, or from an appointment, which is the context where she was at previously. If you are comfortable extracting needs in this format, it works quite well. Otherwise, you may find it helpful to separate them into data, functional, and contextual requirements, as described in the following section. Data requirements. Persona data needs are the objects and information that must be represented in the system. So object, which is the person that will show. Again, the object verb we've discussed, that will be manipulated. Using the semantics just described, it is often useful to think of data requirements as the objects and adjectives related to those objects. So here, the object is person, right? And any adjectives related to that person include accounts, people, addresses, documents, messages, songs, and images, as well as attributes of those such as status, dates, size, creator, and subject. So attributes of that adjectives itself, like these people. So it could be the adjective of that adjective, kind of like that. So this kind of like where the object-oriented programming in the previous video will be more useful. So contextual requirements describe relationships or dependencies between sets of objects in the system. So contextual sorry functional functional needs are the operations or actions that need to be performed on the system's object. So this is the action, and that typically are translated into interface controls. So for example, like the call icon to that person, it combines that imperative and I forget the selective controls we have discussed in the previous video. So that's a functions, actions to that objects if that is using a phone. So this can be thought as the product's actions. Functional needs also define places or containers where objects or information in the interface must be displayed. So it could be in the drawer, in the list, or the pane, etc. These clearly are not actions in and of themselves, but usually are suggested by the actions. So the actions will also determine where that control is. For example, for a more controls, you want to put that either in the navigation bar instead of the drawer. Contextual requirements describe relationships or dependencies between sets of objects in the systems. So kind of like this in the appointment, you're trying to get the relationship for these objects in the system. So these are all group, this person are grouped in this appointment context or appointment space or pane in the mobile phone. This can include which objects in the system need to be displayed together to make sense for workflow or to meet specific persona goals, like this in appointment. You'll want to combine those objects that are related, such as call, text, etc. Right? For example, when choosing items for purchase, a sum list of items already selected for purchase should probably be visible. For choosing an items for purchase, a sum list of items, right, that already selected should be visible. So you're aware what you have been selected on that marketplace. Other contextual requirements may include considerations regarding the physical environment the product will be in use, whether in office, on the go, in harsh condition. So here at home, because she's just setting the appointment early while she's serving her kid, and the skills and capabilities of the persona using the product. So since the real estate agent is a bit techy, she used the phone. She knows that it's less cognitive demanding than the desktop. Other requirements, after you've gone through the exercise of pretending it's magic, it's important to get a firm idea of the realistic requirements of the business and technology you are designing for. So after you get that requirements of what the actual priorities of the functions of the customer, so remember the difference of scenarios to use cases and the and user stories is that use cases is more of like the developer's view or all the edge cases, and then user stories is more like the agile form of the task, more task related, instead of this scenario or more holistic view of the customer. And then use case and user stories. So scenarios are more akin to epics. So these epics actually is just we now have these clear functions that we need to redesign because again, an epics is in terms of scope and level of do not describe task level interaction, but rather broader and far-reaching clusters of information that are intended to meet user goals. Epic focus more on function and presentation of user interface and interaction than they do on user behavior. Another thing is that persona-based scenarios that we have discussed capture nonverbal dialogue on how these uh, functions will help the user communicate on more holistic view based on their environment, the time they do it, etc. Right? So these are in features and these specifications here. So as you can see on that scenario with object context and that's not data functions and context, we have identified the most important functions. It is not a feature because just a moment. Forgot where it is. Use cases. Here, the use it's not a use cases because use case treat all user interaction as equally likely and important, which may be important in software engineering, but not in scenarios because we're just trying to find those few little things that will help us um, leverage correct um, analysis and thesis on what will actually improve our business satisfaction with few effort as possible, while at the same time achieving business goals. Again, goal directed design is the only known proven method that allows us to achieve that with less effort. So after you've gone through that, it's important to get a firm idea of realistic requirements of business and technology. After we get that 1 to 2 or 3 requirements, then we can now balance that with technical and business goals. But we hope that designers have some influence over technology choices when the choice directly affect the user's goals. Business requirements can include stakeholder priorities, development timelines, budgetary and resource constraints, regulations and legal considerations, pricing structures, and business goals. Brand and experience requirements reflect attributes of the experience you want users and customers to associate with your product, company, or organization. So the brand that we have discussed in the video is also now need to be considered in this part of requirements. So as you can see, business and technical is also part of the requirements. So this data, functional, context, other is just the requirements that will be the basis of more increasingly complex functions that we will develop later on. Technical requirements can include weight, size, form, display power constraints, and software platform choices. We discussed this in the previous video in industrial design. Customer and partner requirements can include ease of installation, maintenance, configuration, support costs, and licensing agreements. Having followed step 1 through 5, you should now have a rough creative overview of how the product will address user goals in the form of context scenarios, as well as a reductive list needs and requirements extracted from your research, user models, and the scenarios. Any new design requirements after this point must necessarily change the scope of work. Now you are ready to delve deeper into the details of your product behaviors. Begin to consider how the product and its function will be represented based on the user mental model, which we have discussed in the previous video. Again, we separate problems to solutions. We divide that to data, functional, contextual, and other requirements. And then next, we will discuss the basis for a good product behavior. So, a basis for a good product behavior. In part 1 or in previous video, we discussed how to appropriately sequence the decision to define and design a desirable and effective product. We separate the persona, we research, and we separate the requirements. But how do we make these decisions? What makes a design solution good to this problem? So, does a product solution have recognizable attributes that enable it to accomplish this successfully? Can we generalize common solutions to apply to similar problems? Must a design possess universally applicable features to make it a good design? So, now we're thinking about the solution. We're activating a creative, different type of, a part of our brain. The answer to these questions lie in the use of interaction design values, principles, and patterns. So, this will be the basis or the test if our solutions are good. Design values are guidelines for the successful and appropriate practice of design. Design principles are guidelines for the design of useful and desirable products, systems, and services. So these are the guidelines for the useful and desirable products, systems, and services. So kind of like a system way of defining what is a useful across all attributes. Design patterns are exemplary, generalizable solutions to specific classes of design problems, while design patterns are actually a generalizable solution to a specific class of design problems, kind of like a proven solution to that context. Design values. So again, design values are guidelines for the successful and appropriate practice of design, while design principles are guidelines for the design of useful. So practice, and then guidelines for usefulness, and a pattern is a generalized solution to a context problem. Design values. Design values describe imperatives for effective and ethical practice of design. They inform and motivate the principles and patterns that are discussed in the previous videos. So all of the things that we've discussed in the previous videos, the principles and patterns, the principles is the I think the flow, the exercise, the metaphor, the data thinking, and the patterns is the dialogue, controls, and dialogue and controls and details, designing mobile web, and then designing desktop. Those are the patterns because there's a context specific design. Values are rules that govern action, and typically they are based at their core on a set of beliefs. So designers should create design solutions that are ethical, considerate, helpful, do no harm, improve human situations, purposeful, useful, usable, help users achieve their goals and aspirations, So for ethical, considerate and helpful, it should do no harm, and it should improve human situations. It should be purposeful, useful, usable, help users achieve their goals and aspirations, accommodate user contexts and capacities, pragmatic, viable, feasible, help commissioning organization achieve their goals, accommodate business and technical requirements, elegant, efficient, artful, and effective, represent the simplest complete solution, possess internal self-revealing, understandable coherence, appropriately accommodate and stimulate cognition and emotion. Ethical interaction design. This may be direct effects on user of a product or second order effects on other people whose lives the product touches in some way. So it could be a second order effect of your product that it touches in some way. This can become a particular issue for interaction designers because, unlike graphic designers, the product of their design work is not simply the persuasive communication of a policy or the marketing of a product. It is, in fact, the means of executing policy or the creation of a product itself. So it is different from graphic designer in such a way that the graphic designer is just communicator, but they are the one who design this interaction. It is relatively straightforward to design a product that does well by its users, but the effect that product has on others is sometimes more difficult to calculate. So what's the guidelines for this to prevent this second order effect? Do no harm. Uh, so we should do no harm, of course, but given the complexities of life in the real world, they should at the very least minimize harm. Interactive systems could be a party to several possible types of harm: interpersonal harm, loss of dignity, insult, humiliation; psychological harm, confusion, discomfort, frustration, coercion, boredom; physical harm, pain, injury, deprivation, death, compromise safety; economic harm, loss of profits, loss of productivity, loss of wealth or savings; social and societal harm, exploitation, creation or perpetuation of injustice; environmental harm, pollution, elimination of biodiversity. Avoiding the first two of harm requires a deep understanding of the user audience, like the persona creation, as well as a buy-in from stakeholders that these issues are within a scope that can be addressed by the project. So many of the so basically, when we create those persona goals, we're just actually trying to solve a problem, a small problem in this bigger uh, world. Many of the concepts discussed in the previous video can help designers craft solutions that support human intelligence and emotion. So that would support here by following those patterns and techniques we've discussed. Avoiding physical harm requires a solid understanding of ergonomic principles and appropriate use of interface elements. So these are the third harm. Physical harm can result from something as simple as repetitive stress injury due to excessive mouse usage. Far more serious issues of poor design can result in death, as is possible with overly complex and distracting in-car navigation systems. So as you can see, psychological harm and interpersonal harm is just what we have solved using our software. So that's actually one of, it's not a small problem. I believe, that could be the biggest problem, right? So outside the realm of consumer products, it's easier to imagine examples that are relevant to the last three types of harm, such as stock trading application. So this last, economic, social, and societal harm. Stock trading could harm you economically electronic voting system, social and societal harm, or the control system for an offshore oil drilling platform or nuclear power plant. So that's environmental harm. Products should also be aware of how these behaviors of people using products may affect the broader environment. For example, the iPhone and its associated ecosystem has resulted in dramatic increases in data usage on cellular and other networks. This in turn has resulted in the building of more cellular towers, vast expansions of several farms, and dramatic increase in the demand for power. Improve human situations. Designers should always keep such a broad issues at the back of their mind as they engage in new design projects. Opportunities to do good should always be considered, even if they are slightly outside the box. Increasing understanding, individual, societal, and cultural. Increasing the understanding, so that's always a good that will improve the human, including the society, the culture, the individual. Increasing the efficiency and effectiveness of individuals and groups, improving communication between individuals and groups, reducing cultural tensions between individuals and groups, improving equity, financial, social, legal, balancing cultural diversity with social cohesion. Purposeful interaction design. The primary theme of this book is purposeful design based on understanding of user goals and motivations. If nothing else, the goal-directed process described in Part 1 should help you achieve purposeful design. Part of purposefulness, however, is not only understanding users' goals, but also understanding their limitations. User research and persona serve well in this regard. The behavior patterns you observe and communicate should describe your users' strengths as well as their weakness and blind spots. Goal-directed design helps designer create products that support users where they are weak and empower them when they are strong. Pragmatic interaction design. Developers often state that a proposed design is impossible when what they meant is that it is impossible given the current schedule. Marketing organization may create business plan based on aggregated and statistical data without fully understanding how individual users and customers are likely to behave. Designers who have gathered detailed qualitative research on users may have insight into the business model from a unique perspective. Design works best when a relationship of mutual trust and respect exists among design, business, and engineering, because design specifications that gather dust on a shelf are of no use to anyone. A design must get built to be of value. After it is built, it needs to be deployed in the world, and after it is deployed, it needs to provide benefits to its owner. So you need to fix these issues with developers, marketing, and accommodate it using your design through a holistic and integrated solution. Elegant interaction design. Elegance is defined in the dictionary as both gracefulness and restrained beauty of style, and scientific precision, neatness, and simplicity. We believe that elegance in design, or at least interaction design, incorporates both of these ideals. So again, scientific precision, science are actually included in beauty, represent the simplest complete solution. One of the classic elements of good design is economy of form, using less to accomplish more. In interface design, this means using only the screens and widgets necessary to accomplish the task. This economy extends to behavior, a simple set of tools for the user that allows him to accomplish great things. So this also extends to behavior. A simple set that will allow you to achieve great things is actually great in design. In visual design, this means using the smallest number of visual distinctions that clearly conveys the desired meaning. Less is more in good design, and designers should endeavor to solve design problems with fewest additions of form and behavior in conformance to the mental model of your persona. So, as few as possible to achieve your mental model of the persona. The concept is well known to developers who recognize that better algorithms are clearer and shorter. Additionally, perfection is attained not when there is no more things to add, but uh, the, when there's no more things to add, but when no more things to remove based on Antoine. I forgot the last name. Possess an internal coherence. Good design has the feeling of unified whole in which all parts are in balance and harmony. Products that are poorly designed or not designed at all often look and feel like they are cobbled together from disparate pieces of haphazardly knit together. Often this is the result of implementation model construction, where different development teams work on different interface modules without communicating with each other, or where hardware and software are designed independently of each other. So you need to provide a coherence. Kind of like in writing, you need to keep the main point the main point. It's also the principles of design. So I think that's one of the key or principles in life. You need to keep the main point the main point. The goal-directed design process in which product concepts are conceived of as a whole at the top level and then iteratively refined to detail provides an ideal environment for creating internally coherent designs. So the goal-directed design in which product concepts are conceived of as a whole at the top level first and then iteratively refined to detail provides an ideal environment for creating internally coherent design, because you didn't start with the details and zoom out. You don't have this as much as a lot of points, because there's always basic you could go from, or principles, or like the context scenarios we described. Specifically, the use of scenarios to motivate and test design ensures that solutions are unified by a single narrative thread. So again, those scenarios are useful instead of list or problem requirements because they allow for more creative thinking, appropriately accommodate and stimulate cognition and emotion. Desire is a narrow emotion to appeal to when designing a product that serves a purpose, especially when that product is located in an enterprise or its purpose is highly technical or specialized. So desire is narrow emotion and vague, especially for highly technical and complex interactive products. One would hardly want to make a technician operating a radiation therapy system feel desire for the system. We instead want her to feel a cautious and perhaps a reverent of the rather dangerous energies the system controls. Therefore, we do everything we can as designers to keep her focus on the patient and his treatment. So as you can see, you focus on the goal and the context where that persona is interacting. Thus, in place of what we might call desire, the authors believe that elegance, in the sense of gracefulness, in harmony with the situation or context, means that user is stimulated and supported both cognitively and emotionally in whatever context she is in. The previous videos enumerate what we view as the most critical interaction and visual interface design principles. So those the brand attributes in the previous videos, the visual hierarchy, the use of grids to separate the organization of the same information. Those are the things that provides cognitive and emotional breakthrough. The patterns and principles, the removal of cognitive load are all essential in achieving this purpose. The previous video provided a healthy dose of design insight that will help you transform this knowledge into excellent design, whatever your domain. So those research based on users, and then using that design principles and then patterns, which we were gonna look the overview here. Um, so design principles, interaction design principles are generally applicable guidelines that address issues of behavior, form, and content, kind of like in the previous video of interaction, uh, industrial and visual design. They encourage the design of product behaviors that support the needs of goals of users and create positive experience with the products we design. So these principles will support the needs and goals of users and will create a positive experience with the product we design. These principles are, in effect, a set of rules based on our values as designers and our experiences in trying to live up to those values. So these principles are based on the values that we have discussed to create this. We define these principles as the guidelines that provide a usefulness. So again, this value provide like a higher level that will be based from this. So to make it useful, we focus on the users, right? And then the design pattern are contextual in nature, applicable on a certain scenario. So these principles are in effect a set of rules based on our values as designers and our experiences in trying to live up to those values we've defined. So again, values are guidelines for successful and appropriate practice of design. So that's to make us all successful. At the core of these values is the notion that technology should serve human intelligence and imagination to make it useful, rather than the opposite. Also, people's experiences with technology should be structured in accordance with their abilities of perception, cognition, and movement. Principles are applied throughout the design process, helping us translate tasks and requirements that arise from scenario into formalized structures and behaviors in the interface. So it allows us to find the user's goal and motivation, and then use the principles that will help that achieve their goals. To make it useful, principles operate at different level of details. Design principles operate at several levels of granularity, ranging from the general practice of interaction design down to the specific of interface design. So interaction, that's the reason why we have interaction and visual designer, and we even have visual information architect for website or web application. The line between these categories are fuzzy, to say the least, but interaction design principles can be generally thought of as falling into the following categories. Conceptual principles help define what digital product should be like and how they structurally fit structurally into the broad context of use required by their users. So those are the digital etiquette, the choice of platform, being considerate, optimizing for intermediates, orchestration of flow, reducing work and eliminating exercise, using metaphors, idioms, and affordance are all conceptual level design principles. Those are discussed in the previous video to make us learn better, faster, to achieve their goals in less effort. They don't need to learn the implementation model to just do the simple task because it's just inefficient with their limited cognitive time. Behavior principles describe how a product should behave. In general and in specific context, uh, these behavior principles are the rethinking data entry, storage, and retrieval. Again, it will gonna help their behavior and remove concepts as well, helping them better learn by providing rich modeless, rich visual, sorry, RVM, visual modeless feedback, preventing errors and informing decisions, designing for different needs, providing accessibility, those accelerators for different people, and integral visual design chapter discuss general behavior and level principles. So those are the how we actually structure the information based on size, color, are we gonna use grid, etc. Interface level principle describe effective strategies for the organization, navigation, and communication of behavior and information. So these are the strategies for navigation, the actual details, and communication and behavior, which is the designing for desktop, designing for mobile and other devices, designing for the web, and design details, controls, and dialogue are for. So it all discuss interface level principles and patterns of interaction design. So there's a blurry here between interface principles and patterns, because those are patterns as well, but that is also a principle because it helps us provide this most common design patterns and principles that have been used and proven in the past, such as avoiding confirmation dialogue, putting the most common function in a tool palette, etc. Most interaction and visual design principles are cross-platform. So most interaction and visual design principles are cross-platform. So it does not only apply on desktop but in other as well, such as mobile device, embedded system, requires special some actually such as mobile device and embedded system requires special consideration because of constraints imposed by factors like screen size, input method, and use context. So the way to actually serve those still principles of interface level is by using the right idiom, the drawers that we have discussed in the previous video, etc. Behavioral and interface level principles minimize work. One of the primary advantage of this behavior and interface is that they minimize the actual work. So they follow this principle of orchestration and flow, optimizing for intermediates, digital etiquette. This is where you actually apply those higher level concepts. So one of the primary purpose that design principles serve is to optimize the experience of the user when she engages with the product to make it more useful. In the case of productivity tools and most non-entertainment oriented products, this optimization usually means minimizing work, because in business, again, we're trying to minimize work for them so that they can achieve more with less, so that they could produce more and then therefore provide more productivity for humans. So for the market, most of the design principles discussed in the previous videos attempt to minimize work one way or another while giving the user greater levels of feedback and contextual, useful information. So it also realized their cognitive abilities, their instinct, by using idiom that allows them to make the product useful. So aside from minimizing work, we're also making it easier for them by providing those additional capabilities, that extension of their cognitive abilities. Games, however, engage a user by requiring to do just the right amount of certain kind of work and then rewarding them for doing so. Of course, too much work or too little reward turns a game into a core. Interaction design patterns. So these are the contextual patterns that we can use in specific context. Design patterns are a means of capturing useful design solutions and generalizing them to address similar problems. This effort to formalize design knowledge and record best practices can serve several vital purposes: reduce design time and effort on new products, improve the quality of design solutions, facilitate communications between designers and developers, educate designers. Architectural patterns and interaction design. So, by defining a rigorous set of architectural features in The Timeless Way of Building in Oxford, 1979, Alexander sought to describe the essence of architectural design that creates a feeling of well-being on the part of the inhabitants of the structure. So Alexander actually created this pattern for was created for architecture before in the actual building, so that this is the pattern that they can use for an interaction of that complex or for the design of that actual complex physical structure. This last aim of Alexander project resonates so closely with the needs of interaction designers. The focus on the human aspects of each pattern differentiates architectural and interaction design patterns from engineering patterns. So the focus on the human aspects of these patterns, based on that inhabitants, the well-being, is what separates it from just a logical engineer pattern, which are primarily intended as a way to reuse and standardize programming code. So this is where the architectural and interaction design patterns are similar. However, the crucial difference is interaction design patterns are concerned not only with structure and organization of elements, but also with dynamic behavior and changes in elements in response to your user activity. So this organization of elements, as discussed in the previous scenario, could change based on the reiteration of our context scenario and how we can best achieve our user goals, depending on the new information we got, right? So essentially, this variability is determined by the user, not by any other attributes. So it is a more user focused base, because again, we're trying to design an interactive product. It is tempting to view the distinction simply as one of the change over time, but these changes are interesting because they occur in response to both application state and human activity. So it's not just about the human change that we need to consider, but also with the business goals, right? With the technical landscape that change. So this differentiate them from preordained temporal transitions that can be found in mechanical products. So mechanical products are more stable than the more complex adaptive system, which is technology and people, or software and people and media, which each have their own distinct of design patterns. Recording and using interaction design patterns. Patterns are always context specific. They are defined to be applicable to common design situations that are similar contexts, constraints, tensions, and forces. So similar contexts, constraints, tensions, and forces based on architectural design patterns. When capturing a pattern, it's important to record the context to which the solution applies. So when capturing that, it's important to record the context, because one or more specific example of the solution to that context, to make sure that pattern is really applicable to our context. The abstracted features common to all the examples and the rationale behind the solution, why it is a good solution. So you should have a clear written document of why it is good and the common context which that solution is provided for. A set that makes pattern useful is called pattern library or catalog that organize it in terms of context. So that's the pattern catalog that will create this actually pattern. So you collect those different contexts that could be that we could use this design pattern. So if this set is rigorously defined and specified, sufficiently complete in details to describe all the solution in a domain, it is called pattern language. So if you have this pattern library or catalog, is rigorously defined and specified and sufficiently complete to describe all the solution in a particular domain, not just in a context but in this deep domain. It is called pattern language, kind of like UI frameworks today, such as Bootstrap, Material, by Google, etc. But Christopher Alexander is swift to point out architectural patterns are the antithesis of prefab building because context is of absolute importance in defining the manifest form of the pattern in the world. The environment where the pattern is deployed is critical, as are other patterns that compose it, contain it, and about it. The core of each pattern lies in the relationship between. So again, the environment where the pattern is deployed is critical, as other patterns that compose it, contain it, and about it. Because again, our environment is complex adaptive system. The core of each pattern lies in the relationship between represented objects and between those objects and the user's goals. This is one reason why a general style guide can never be a substitute for context-specific design solutions. The pattern's precise form is certain to be somewhat different for each instance, and the object that define it will naturally vary from domain to domain, but the relationship between objects remain essentially the same. So types of interaction design patterns, like most design patterns, interaction design patterns can be hierarchically organized from the system level down to the level of individual interface widgets. So, so like most design patterns, this type of interaction design patterns, design patterns called interaction can be hierarchically organized from system level down to the level of individual interface widgets. Like principles, they can be applied at the different levels of organizations. And as with design principles, the distinctions between these different levels are sometimes quite fuzzy. So, as with design principles, the distinction, could overlap as well. So remember, the last part of principle is also kind of like a pattern. But here we will discuss the things that we have discussed already in the previous videos. A sample pattern for desktop and a mobile. So postural patterns can be applied at the conceptual level and help determine the overall product stance in relation to the user. So these postural patterns can be applied at the conceptual level pattern that we have discussed earlier and help the overall product stance in relation to the user. So where is that conceptual level? Here. Sorry, conceptual principles. In relation level and help determine the overall product stance in relation to the user. An example of a postural pattern is transient, which means that the person uses it only brief periods of time so that a larger goal can be achieved elsewhere. So a postural pattern, like an example of a postural pattern, like the transient, sovereign, that which we discussed, and the demonic, which means that a person uses it for only brief periods of time so that a larger goal can be achieved elsewhere. So the concept of product posture and its most uh, significant patterns are discussed at length in platform and posture video. So as you can see, this is where patterns and principles overlap. Those are conceptual and postural patterns at once. It determines and help us apply a specific design pattern in that context. Structural patterns solve problems that relate to the arrangement of information and functional elements of the screen, kind of like in the visual design chapter. Structural patterns have become increasingly documented, especially with the rise of popularity in mobile user interfaces and platforms such as iOS and Androids. They consist of views, panes, and other elements grouping discussed in previous video. So the one that we discussed for designing desktop and mobile. Behavioral patterns, so that structural patterns, but at the same time a visual hierarchy patterns that help us provide a more coherent design that also come back to the design value, right? Behavioral patterns solve wide-ranging problems relating to specific interactions with functional or data elements. So this is a more of a control part of the interface. What most people think of as widget behaviors fall into this category, and many such low-level patterns as discussed are discussed in designing for desktop, designing for mobile and other devices, designing for the web, and design details, controls, and dialog videos. Building a mental model of catalog patterns is one of the most critical aspects of education of an interaction design. As we'll become aware of the best parts of each other's work, we can collectively advance the interaction idioms we provide to our users. By leveraging existing work, we can focus on solving new problems rather than reinventing the wheel. So this is one of what I want to emphasize as well, that these patterns are actually just, I mean, no one really created anything from scratch anymore. We're just building from other works uh, so that we can focus on solving new problems. We're just assembling now. We're using UI security for Firebase UI frameworks such as Material. We're using AWS backend, etc. It's the differentiator now is how we assemble those things, the uniqueness of those assembled, and how it can actually solve user problems that is actually useful for them. Sample interaction design patterns, desktop organizer workspace. So this pattern is optimal for full screen applications that require user access to many different kinds of objects, manipulations of those objects in groups, and display of detailed content or attributes of individual objects or documents. So this we have seen this for Outlook in the previous video. It's a full screen that require user access to many different kinds of objects, manipulation of those objects in group, and displays of detailed content or attributes of individual objects or documents. This pattern permits all this to be done smoothly in a single screen without the need for additional windows. Many email clients use this pattern, and variation of it appear in many authoring and information management tools where rapid access to and manipulation of various types of objects is common. So here, the primary structural pattern used by Microsoft Outlook is widely used throughout the industry across many diverse product domains. The left vertical pane provides navigation and drives the content of the overview pane. So it drives the content of the overview in the upper right. A selection in this pane populates the lower right pane, detail or document content. Double drawer, pioneered by Facebook, and Path mobile apps, drawers that expose by swiping the main content view to the right to expose the left drawer, or left to expose the right drawer, are now common in mobile apps on iOS and Android. See figure 7.2. The left drawer typically contains primary navigation for the mobile app. The right drawer, when it exists, typically is used for access to an ancillary list of objects such as friend in the case of Facebook. So here, the Facebook double drawer is another structural pattern that has become nearly as ubiquitous for mobile apps as the organizer workspace pattern has for desktop apps. The drawer on the left provides navigation and drives the app's content view. The pane on the right is used for rapid global access to a list of ancillary objects, in this case, your Facebook friends. So the pane on the right is for rapid, we discussed this in the previous video. So like the organizer workspace pattern, the double drawer is almost perfectly optimized for its context. In this case, mobile rather than desktop. Swiping across the main content pane to reveal list of navigation or communication options is a simple gross motor action, ideal for one-handed use. So selecting from the open drawer is similarly easy to do with thumb, and the animated opening and shutting of the drawer is aesthetically satisfying as well. It allows you to see where you are at the present and from the past. It's no wonder this pattern has been so quickly and widely adopted. So it's optimized for that context, so that pattern. In this case, mobile rather than desktop. So swiping across the main content. So as you can see, it depends on the context that this pattern is or idiom became useful. So here, a simple gross motor action, ideal for one-handed use. And then selecting from the open drawer is similarly easy to do with just a thumb. So it removes cognitive load, another structural pattern that has become nearly as ubiquitous for mobile app as the organizer workspace pattern has for desktop apps. Greater navigation and drives the app content view. The pane on the right is used for rapid global access for list of ancillary objects, in this case, your Facebook friends. So here, the last topic. So great, we're now done for this course, optimizing for intermediates. Optimizing for intermediates. Most users of technology know all too well that buying a new digital appliance or downloading a new software app often means several days of frustration while learning a new interface. So people actually learn that new digital appliance or downloading a new software app actually would be a new learning experience. On the other hand, many experienced users of digital products may find themselves frustrated because the product treats them like beginners. So this is what intermediates I was talking about. In the previous videos, the intermediates are actually frustrated because they are treated like beginners, and also the features for beginners are actually hindering them to do their work, and it is disrupting flow and adding exercise. So left to their own devices, developers typically create interactions suitable for experts. Developers are by necessity experts on the features they build, and they tend to consider the presentation of each function interface as having equal weight from a coding and debugging standpoint. They are all of approximately equal weight because they all need to operate bug-free. So left to their own devices, developers typically create interactions suitable for experts. So developers tend to create an interface for expert. Developers are by necessity expert on the features they build, and they tend to consider the presentation of each function in their interface as having equal weight. From coding and debugging standpoint, they are all approximately equal weight because they all need to operate bug free. So all those interface or functions, they may think that it's all equal, kind of like the use cases, but they don't think that the visual organization of that is important to serve the mental model of the user. So marketing departments, on the other hand, typically demand interactions suitable only for beginners. They spend much of their time demonstrating and selling their product to people unfamiliar with it. So over time, they get a base view of user behavior and feature priorities. So it becomes their habits. The psychology of the marketers is for beginners because they want to get a new users. Kind of like it becomes their goals or motivations. It become habitual for them. That's hard to change. They demand that the training wheels get bolted on. Both of this approach led to a frustrating experience for the majority of users who are neither beginners nor experts. So as you can see, the habits of developer and marketing are hindering this approach or to intermediates. Some developers and designers try to have it both ways, choosing to segregate these two experiences by creating wizards for beginners and buying critical functionality for experts, deep in nested menus or multi-layered dialog boxes. So some combination of developer and designers actually try to have it both ways, choosing to segregate these two experiences by creating wizard for beginners and burying critical functionality for expert deep in nested menus or multi-layer dialog boxes, ultimately making the product unuseful and not serving the design principles and the goals that we try to achieve in the first place. Again, we're trying to make our product useful so that we can be successful as a designer. Many beginners don't want to deal with the extra time and effort associated with moving step by step through a wizard each time they access a feature. So a lot of intermediates don't want to deal with that extra wizard every time they access a simple task or feature. As we will later see, the solution to this predicament lies in a different understanding of how users master new concept and task. So design principle don't weld on training wheels. Per- Perpetual intermediates, most users, for most of the time they are using a product, are neither beginners nor experts. Instead, they are intermediates. The experience level of people performing an activity tends, like most population distribution, to follow the classic statistical bell curve. Here, for almost any activity requiring knowledge or skill, so any activity that are required knowledge, to push, if we graph the number of people against skill level, a relatively small number of beginners are on the left side, a few experts on the right side, and the majority of intermediate users are in the center. So these are true for any skill building activity. The bell curve is a snapshot of many users across time, Although most intermediates stay in that category, the beginners do not remain beginners for very long. The difficulty of maintaining a high level of expertise also means that experts come and go rapidly. So it's hard to maintain expertise as well because technologies change and the interactions with those people and technologies change as well. People become more experts as time goes by. Therefore, the bar for being expert uh, change as well. So it's like there's a complex. So the people don't the key is people don't remain here and here. So another thing is that all the beginners quickly improve to become intermediates. They seldom go on to become experts. Although everybody spends some minimum time as a beginner, nobody remains in that state for long. Conversely, learning and improving are rewarding, so beginners become intermediates very quickly or they drop out. So that's the psychology, is that if your beginner could not be intermediate, or that the one that usually uh, using your product, they will quit. Or for example, all skiers, for example, spend time as beginners, but those who find they don't rapidly progress beyond, more failing than skiing, quickly abandon the sport. So, but beginners change even more rapidly. Uh, so, experts do not stay there, and beginners change more rapidly to become intermediate. So, beginners, what does the application do? What does it? What doesn't it do? How do I print? Where do I start? Intermediates. I forgot how to import. How to find facility X? Remind me what this does. What was the command for X? Oops, can I undo what I just did? What new features are in this upgrade? Experts, how do I automate this? What are the shortcuts for this command? Can this be changed? How can I customize this? Is there a keyboard equivalent? What is dangerous? So unless you're using this for your job, it's really rare to becomes expert at this, because again, this is our just learn idiom, and we quickly forgot things that we only use in transient. Design principle, nobody wants to remain a beginner. So most occupants of the beginner end of the curve either migrate to the center bulge of intermediates or drop off the graph and find some product or activity in which they can migrate into intermediacy. Most users thus remain in perpetual state of adequacy, striving for fluency, with their skills ebbing and flowing like the tides, depending on how frequently they use the product. Because again, the frequency and repetition, we all learn from repetition, determine how skilled we are on the product. So most users in this middle state would like to learn more. Again, design principle optimized for intermediates. Most users in the middle state would like to learn more about the product but usually don't have the time. So again, they don't have the time because the only way they can become expert on that is if they use that every day. Occasionally, the opportunity or need to do so arises. Sometimes these intermediates use the product extensively for weeks at a time to complete a big project. During this time, they learn new things about the product. Their knowledge grows beyond its previous boundaries. So that's a psychology of skill building. But sometimes, if you now need the product and then use it, you actually learn new things about the product because you don't want to stay on that for long, right? No one wants to be stagnant. We always move. Their knowledge grow beyond its previous boundaries. Kind of like reading increasingly complex books. It pushes you. So one of the things that actually helps you when you read those increasingly complex books is that it teaches you the process of skill building, whether it's even if it doesn't help you economically, such as reading literature, the sense of having being good at a skill, such as whether it's literature, design, etc., or coding, uh, makes us psychologically happy. So other times, however, they do not use the product for months at a time and forget significant portions of what they knew. When they return to the product, they are not beginners, but they need reminders to jog their memory. So they're not beginners when they return because they already pushed the boundary, but they need reminders. Inflecting the interface. Inflecting an interface means organizing it to minimize difficult navigation within the interface. In practice, this means placing the most frequently desired functions and controls in the most immediate and convenient locations, such as toolbars or palettes. So how do you get this most frequently desired functions in the context scenario we just discussed? So the most common functions will dictate how you organize this. So this is the pattern uh, uh, or the principle that will help us better serve the user for us to be a successful designer based on our values. As you can see how all this connected now. So inflicting an interface means organizing it to minimize difficult navigation within the interface. Again, minimizing excise so that we can provide those magic to the customer while achieving their goal. In practice, this means placing the most frequently desired functions and controls in the most immediate and convenient locations, such as toolbars or palette. Less frequently used functions are pushed deeper into the interface, where users won't stumble over them. Advanced features that are less often used but have a bigger payoff for users can be safely tucked away in menus, dialog box, or drawers, where they can be accessed only when needed. Another principle in this later we will discuss is we need to hide the lever seat again and the layout manipulation tool that will change the actual visual interface. So design principle: inflect the interface for difficult navigation for intermediate users. So this is the principle that will help us better make the product useful, that will eventually make us a successful designer. So it aligns with the design principles, and these are the some of this could be a pattern as well, because I think it's just a principle because it applies to most any skill level or skill building activity. So almost any point and shoot digital camera is a good example of inflection. The most commonly used function, taking a picture, is provided by a prominent hardware button that is easily accessible at a moment's notice. Less commonly used functions, such as adjusting the exposure, require interaction with menus or touchscreen controls. So less commonly used function, you need menus and then and interactions or touchscreen controls of the screen. So commensurate effort. This principle simply states that people will willingly work harder for something that is more valuable. So that value, by the way, is in the eye of the user. So based on that persona's goals, if that will actually help them do a complex things that will help them more productive based on their goals, then they will be willing to work hard to learn it. They will spend more time to learn it. Just like me, I'm learning this design and learning this book because I think it will provide a better income, because it will provide a bit more complex skills, more sophisticated skills. It has nothing to do with how technically difficult a feature is to implement, but rather is entirely related to the user's goals. And this is the most important principle in the proper inflection of interfaces. So with this inflection interface, there is a commensurate effort that will determine how the users will learn these most common or most difficult functions, depending on the desire. It's not about the technical difficulty. So if the user really wants something, he will work harder to get it. If you need to format beautiful documents With multiple columns, several fonts, and fancy headings to impress his boss, he will be highly motivated to explore the application's recesses to learn how. That user will put commensurate effort into the project. But if another user wants only to print plain documents in a single column and one font, no amount of inducement will get him to learn those more advanced formatting features. If you had features into your applications that are complex to manage, users will be willing to tolerate that complexity only if the rewards are worth it. So again, they mentioned that you can see or the behavior uh, if you show the incentives. So this is what it is. There's a lot of money or stake involved. You will definitely see that people are willing to work hard on it. This is why a product's user interface can't be complex for achieving simple results, but it can be complex for achieving complex results. The same principles, users make commensurate effort if the rewards justify it. Progressive disclosure. A particular useful design pattern that exemplifies commensurate effort is progressive disclosure. In progressive disclosure, advanced or less frequently used controls are hidden in an expanding pane, which offers a small or expand hide toggle control to give the user access. So we've already discussed this. We're just not aware that it's actually called progressive disclosure principle. So this type of design is a boon to expert users because this toggle is usually sticky. So actually, it's a pattern as well, not just a principle, that exemplifies commensurate effort is progressive disclosure. So for those things that are complex, you put that in the toolbar or in the menu so that the expert could know or could learn that. That will provide them a faster navigation. So in progressive disclosure, advanced or less frequently used controls are hidden in an expanding pane, which offers a small or expand high toggle control to give the user access. We have discussed this tremendously, these details for this interface. We're just not discussing that in a view of this pattern or principle of progressive disclosure. This type of design is a boon to expert users because the toggle is usually sticky. Thus, that is once left open, it stays that way. It also gives intermediate an easy window into more advanced features but allow them to be stowed away neatly when not in use. Kinda like a toolbar. When it is open, it stays there. Kinda like a modus feedback. But if the user or the intermediate don't want or the beginner don't want that, they can neatly put that away when not in use. Many of Adobe's Creative Suite tools make good use of progressive disclosure in their tool array as shown in figure 10.2. So here, Adobe Creative Suite application all make similar use of progressive disclosure to tame the complexity of their tool palette for intermediates so that it is not, it's not hard to read for intermediates. They could just do their simple task because they don't have time to learn this for now. Experts can expand them and take advantage of the risky expansion state, which is remembered across states. So experts can expand them and then take advantage of this sticky expansion state. So which is remembered across session. So once the user click that, it will expand and that session will be remembered by that application. So it will remain open until the expert close it. Organizing for inflection. In general, controls and displays should be organized in an interface according to three attributes: frequency of use, degree of dislocation, and a degree of risk exposure. So, this organization for inflection, or uh, organizing to minimize difficult navigation in the interface, has actually three principles, which we kind of discussed a lot in the previous videos. So the frequency of use is how often the controls, functions, and objects or displays are used in a typical daily patterns of use of intermediate users. Items and tools that are most frequently used many times a day should be immediately enriched. Less frequently used items, used perhaps once or twice a day, should be no more than click or two away, or tap away. Other items can be 2 or 3 clicks away. Rarely used facilities shouldn't be removed from the product if they provide real benefits to your personas, but they should be removed from the everyday workspace. So I think you get what I mean. So this is for expert, and these other items for like curiosity of the intermediate. Degree of dislocation. So these are kind of like the in OneNote and Word. There's like different views for Word at the bottom bar. So there's a layout inducing. You want to minimize that. So this degree of dislocation refers to the amount of sudden change in an interface in the document or information being processed by the application caused by the invocation of a specific function or command. Generally speaking, it's a good idea to put this type of functions deeper into the interface. So you need to put that deeper, or at least smaller, in the bottom bar. If it's a common, if you're tailoring to an expert or computer literate, such as authoring tools such as Word, you can put that at the bottom bar, but ideally it should be nested into the menu because the user may not use that again, or may not be able to go back again. We're minimizing effort for these intermediate users so that they can use, we can achieve the value of a successful design by achieving our user goals by applying interaction principles and patterns that will make it useful for our users. Degree of risk exposure deals with functions that are irreversible or may have other dangerous ramifications, such as the seat lever we discussed. Missiles require two human beings turning keys simultaneously on opposite sides of the room to arm them. As with dislocation functions, you want to make these types of functions more difficult for your users to stumble across, so that the intermediate, when they become curious, they won't be able to click that, but instead will be able to not disrupt the flow of that, so that it is useful, supporting their psychological and emotional needs. As users get more experience with more complex features, they will search for shortcuts, and you should provide them. This not only help intermediates expand their reach over time, but it's also a necessity for expert users. So this will provide the from time to time users, such as the one who create project and want to expand their knowledge. This will provide them those intellectual curiosity. So missiles require two humans turning keys simultaneously on opposite side of the room to arm them, right? So you should do that as well in this lever affecting tools. Now, designing for 3 levels of experience. In designing digital products, our goal should be neither to pander to beginners, since they don't stay beginners for long, but they quickly move to intermediates compared to um, expert vanishing from their expertise, nor to rush intermediates into expertise. So we don't want to hinder beginners, but we don't also rush intermediates into expertise because they may not have time. So our approach should be threefold: to rapidly and painlessly move beginners to intermediacy, to avoid putting obstacles in the way of intermediates who want to become experts, most of all, to keep perpetual intermediates happy as they move around the middle of the skill spectrum. So these are the most important. That's why most of all, because you don't want to disrupt the flow in the name of making the beginners rapidly advance. So what beginners need? As an interaction designer, it's best to imagine that users, especially beginners, are simultaneously very intelligent and very busy. They need some instruction but not very much, and the process has to be rapid and targeted. If a ski instructor begins lecturing on snowpack composition and meteorology, he will lose his students regardless of their aptitude for skiing. Just because a user needs to learn how to operate a product doesn't mean that he needs or wants to learn how it works inside. It's just enough with his current goals and time, right? So it depends on his goals. Also, providing those more complex first features at first are overwhelming. So it doesn't really provides the skill development that we all thirst. The feeling that we have progressed on something. Design principle. That's also the reason why we need to read increasingly complex books. We need to start with simple. Design principle. Imagine users as very intelligent but very busy. On the other hand, intelligent people always learn better when they understand cause and effect. So you must help them understand why things work as they do. We use mental models to bridge the contradiction. So actually we this is the principles of learning. We learn by repetition, but we also learn by understanding the cause and effect. But we don't really need to understand the deep level cause and effect. We just need to understand the cause and effect based on our mental models, or based on the connecting the representation to our mental models. So we use mental models to bridge the contradiction. If the interface represented model closely follows the user's mental model as discussed in the previous video, it will provide the understanding the user needs without forcing him or her to figure out the implementation model or the system model based on the Norman. Getting beginners on board, a new user must grasp the product's concept and scope quickly, or he will abandon it. Thus, the designer's first order of business is to ensure that the product adequately reflects the user's mental model of his task. So this is more the bias of marketing department, right? So the designer's goal is to reflect the user's mental model of his task using the context scenario. This is where the judgment of the designer of what is actually important to the user will come, based from that research of behavior pattern and that context scenario and reiteration of that, and those balancing of business and user goals. He may not recall from use to use exactly which command needed to act on a particular object, but he will definitely remember the relationship between objects and actions, the important concepts, based on how you prioritize, such as in games, you usually now use W to go to walk in at front direction, and then A for left, and so that is the most important concept based on his mental model. If the interface conceptual structure or the commands is consistent with this mental model, the important concept, if the interface conceptual structure is consistent with this mental model, so it's kind of like related as well. Again, in the designing for different needs. So the design pattern and design principle, right? One of the design principle is um, using known commands, right? Accelerator, etc. And the structure of the interface must match the user's model. Getting beginners to a state of intermediacy requires extra help from the application. But this extra help will get in their way as soon as they become intermediates. So this means that whatever extra help you provide, it must not be fixed into the interface. It must know how to go away when its services are no longer required. Beginners need overview information such as a guided tour or UI elements designed to help users get accustomed to new functions, but which keys to be presented after repeated successful use, not a standard online help, just as discussed in designing for different needs. So again, this for getting beginners on board is like maintaining our intermediate users' attention while not while also helping rapidly the beginners, like helping them. I forgot what I'm gonna say earlier about intermediate, but basically we discussed that in designing different needs video. So here you provide those UR tool, you welcome guided tour, and then you vanish that once the user are comfortable. A separate guide facility displayed within a dialog box is a fine means for communicating overview, scope, and purpose. As the user begin to use the product, a dialog box can appear that state the product basic goals and tools. Naming the main features. As long as the guide stay focused on beginner issues like scope and goals and avoid perpetual intermediate and expert issues described later, it should be adequate for assisting beginners. Beginners also rely heavily on menus to learn and execute commands. So the dialog boxes that the menu items launch, if they do so at all, should also be thoroughly explanatory and come with convenient cancel button. Beginners across platforms were often asked if the concept of perpetual intermediates apply to non-desktop products. Ultimately, we believe the same considerations we apply to desktop software should be used here. A well-designed interface, regardless of platform, should help its users quickly become familiar and comfortable with navigation and functionality, based on their mental model, based on their goals, what is really the user are you trying to optimize for to make your product useful. What experts needs? Experts, sometimes called influencers in marketing circles, are also a vital group because their opinions have a disproportionate effect on purchasing. Experts, of course, listen to other experts, but they also exert influence on other prospective customers, setting the tone for product reviews and discussions. This remains true even if with the rise of online products ratings, though perhaps less so than before the likes of Amazon came into existence. Still, in many cases when a beginner considers your product, he will trust the expert's opinion more than an intermediate's. This sometimes results in a disconnect. When an expert says it's not very good, she may really mean it's not very good for experts like me. Beginners don't realize this, however, and will often take an expert's advice even though it may not apply to their situational needs. So these are great knowledge, right? For any product, don't just believe on any expert reviews because sometimes they may say that that is not good for them. But we are have all different goals that we just can't articulate. If we can articulate that better, maybe we just need that some functions with for a certain use, right? Experts may occasionally look for historic features and they might make heavy use of a few of them. However, they will definitely demand faster access to their regular working set of tools, which may be quite large In other words, experts want shortcuts to everything. So they will definitely demand faster access to the regular working set of tools, like we've discussed in different needs. Everybody has different individual working setups, so which may be quite large. In other words, they want shortcuts to everything in their interface. Anyone who uses a digital product for hours a day will very quickly internalize the nuances of its interface. It isn't so much that they want to cram frequently used commands into their heads as much as it is unavoidable because you're using it every day. We all learn by doing so, and also the cause and effects as well, that this product are designed for users to immediately learn it. Their frequency of use both justifies and requires the memorization, to makes us automate it, because it's just useful for us. It just saves us time. Humans just tend to wants to save time because we have limited of it. So expert users constantly and aggressively seek to learn more and see more connections between their actions and the product's behavior and representation. Experts appreciate new powerful features. The mastery of the product insulate them from becoming disturbed by the added complexity. So the added complexity insulate them. They are insulated from that. The more expert you are. That's why increasingly complex books actually makes you an expert because you become more sophisticated. Experts also appreciate high information density relative to intermediate or beginning users. So they want high information density because they can absorb it quickly, just like in reading increasingly complex books, right? You have more, because it's just a sheer repetition of how you do things every day, right? You just your brain are just prepared for that. For some special products, it is appropriate to optimize the user experience. For experts, in particular, tools that technically minded people rely on for a significant portion of their professional responsibilities should be aimed at a high degree of proficiency. Development and creative authoring tools generally fall into this category, such as Word, and Adobe, as do scientific instrument and non-consumer medical devices. So any scientific people, will quickly understand that because we expect the users of those products to already possess the necessary technical knowledge and to be willing to invest significant time and effort in mastering the application. Not necessarily that it's they already know that, but because of their scientific nature and their characteristic, even though they don't know that, they are willing to become an intermediate. So what perpetual intermediates need? The overall design bias them toward expert users. At the same time, cumbersome tools such as wizards or the likes of Clippy, the infamously annoying Would You Like Help Smart Assistant created by Microsoft for its Office suite of products in the 1990s, are grafted onto the product to meet marketing perception of new users. So you need to balance because the overall design tends to focus on expert or users. Experts rarely use them, and beginners soon want to discard these embarrassing reminders of their ignorance. But the perpetual intermediate majority is perpetually stuck with them. Instead, perpetual intermediates need fast access to the most common tools based on the context scenario and the functions, the context functions and data requirements. They don't need scope and purpose explained to them because they already know these things. Tooltips are the perfect perpetual intermediate idiom. Tooltips say nothing about scope and purpose and meaning. They only state function in the briefest of idioms, consuming the least amount of video space in the process. Perpetual intermediates know how to use reference materials. They are motivated to dig deeper and learn, as long as they don't have to tackle too much at once. This means that online help is perpetual intermediate tool. So the online help we discuss in different needs are actually perpetual intermediate. They actually also know how to use reference materials. They are motivated to dig deeper and learn, as long as they don't have to tackle too much at once. So they use it by way of index. They search that. So that part of help must be comprehensive. Perpetual intermediates establish the function that they use with regularity and those that they use only rarely. The user may experiment with obscure features, but he will soon identify, probably subconsciously, his frequently used working set. So subconsciously, he will find that just by nature of repetition. So you may think they are aware, but aren't. It's just that the way our psychology or cognitive principle works. The user will demand that the tools in his working set be placed front and center in the user interface, where they are easy to find and remember. To avoid cognitive load, to maximize those finite cognitive energy and time. Perpetual intermediates usually know that advanced features exist even though they may not need for them or know how to use them. But the knowledge that they are there is reassuring to the perpetual intermediate, convincing him that he made the right choice investing in this product. So again, they're investing in this product, and then having things or features that they do not know doesn't mean that they won't gonna like it. It's actually a feature, not a bug, because it allows them to see that they can improve more in case they need, especially for those rarely used or used project to project basis, and they quickly forgot, and after that they want to learn more. The average skier may find it inspirational to know that a scary black diamond expert run is just beyond those trees, even if she never intends to use it. It gives her something to aspire to and dream about, and it gives her sense that she's at a good ski resort. But in most cases, you need to apply the bulk of your talents, time, and resources to designing the best interaction possible for your most representative users, the perpetual intermediates. When digital products follow the principle of commensurate effort, the learning curve doesn't go away, but it disappears from the user's mind, which is just as good. So if you follow this commensurate effort, the learning curve doesn't go away for for intermediates. They can still learn more, but it disappear from beginners who doesn't want need to see them, and for intermediates it doesn't distract them. So that's how you can meet all of these three, avoiding putting obstacles in the way of intermediates who want to become expert, rapidly and painlessly move beginners into intermediate, and most of all, to keep perpetual intermediates happy as they move around the middle of all the skill spectrum. So one of the key things here is that perpetual intermediate are very intelligent but very busy as well, because they are limited cognitive energy. So again guys, that's it. We're finished for that book. Thank you for watching. See you on the next video.